trail I like backpacking in an isolated area of Pennsylvania was the setting for this odd encounter. The trail has a short section that goes over someone's cabin property and continues on the other side of his yard. It's marked with an orange blaze so you can see where to go. Usually it's an empty cabin. I always do some peering inside since it's in a pretty secluded spot, probably 4 or 5 miles from a major road. One time I was hiking through and there is a large dude grilling outside, with about 15 Bud Light cans on the ground around him. I distinctly remember him saying, "Keep it moving, no food here," which I thought was funny since I didn't say anything about needing food. Fast forward the following year, and I decide to take my sister, my wife, and her best friend on a trip that takes us through this very spot. As we are walking up on it, I see the dude is there again, which is odd, since I've hiked the trail many times and this is only twice I've seen him. He's grilling again, beer cans everywhere. I see him start to give the "keep it moving" signal until he sees who I am with. Now the girls I'm traveling with are attractive, so I'm nervous all of a sudden. He asks us to stay for dinner, says he has plenty of extra food. I tell him no, we are good, just trying to enjoy the trail away from the comforts of home. He gets weirdly pushy about us staying, and I firmly say no thanks, and we're just passing through. I hear the dude mumble to himself as we continue past his house. This is where things get weird. There's a prominent camping spot not far from this section of trail, and it's late. In my head, I want to keep going because I don't want to camp near this dude. The consensus is everyone is pretty tired, so we set up camp. I'm nervous the whole time, thinking this drunk dude knows there are 3 women camping in tents near his cabin. I never get nervous around folk I see on the trail because everyone's usually very nice and wonderful to talk to. This guy just felt off to me, though. Fast forward to the middle of the night, and sure enough, I hear someone on the trail outside the tent. I'm just praying it's a bear at this point. But I hear the dude mumbling to himself and I panic. I hear him now in the camp. He's going through our stuff and is pissed drunk. Okay, think I realize I have a blowhorn on my pack I use on the trail to scare animals off should I encounter any. So I unzip the tent slowly and roll out. Dude is fumbling around, and it's scary as hell because it's the middle of the darkness in the middle of nowhere. I start to run towards him and blow my air horn repeatedly, and it's loud. Everyone in their tent starts screaming. The dude also screaming and starts running out of there. Everyone is so shooken up at this point, we quickly pack up and night hike out of there. Worst experience I've ever had. My wife and I were out camping back in 2012. We had spent 52 nights in the backwoods that year. Every weekend we would get remote on Vancouver Island and enjoy the solitude. We were on a beach a good distance from anywhere, and we had a fire. To get to the trail to leave the beach was 1 kilometer along the beach and 2 kilometers to the road through the forest. There was nobody there except a guy named Leon from New Zealand that we met earlier on the beach that was planning on sleeping in his van up at the road. We invited him down to the beach for fire, and we brought a bottle of wine that we could share. He came out and we talked about all kinds of things. We kept hearing female voices from what sounded like behind us in the bushes. I had figured it was just someone who had anchored offshore, and the sound was bouncing in a weird way. All of us acknowledged that we could hear the voices. It was getting late, so Leon hiked out to his van and we stoked the fire because my wife was creeped out. We stayed up very late and the voices had stopped, so we decided to put out the fire and go to bed. We had scanned the cove with a flashlight several times looking for boats that could be the source of the talking. It must have been 2 a.m. and we decided to go to bed. About 15 minutes after we lay down, we heard footsteps in our camp area, over by where the fire was. They came from the direction of the bushes toward inland behind us. That direction was not traversable by people. We just lay there hoping it was a bear or something, because the island only has black bears, and they are easy to deal with. The footsteps went from the fire, then over to our tent, then back into the woods. 5 minutes later, the footsteps go back to the fire with 2 female voices talking gibberish very loudly. They are having a discussion at full volume in the dead of night, very far away from civilization, without using lights to navigate through dense brush relatively quietly in a direction that we considered impassable. After they were done at the fire pit area, they walked over to our tent still talking at loud volume. They stood over us and talked for a few seconds, then went completely dead as night silent. Then they went back into the woods. We just lay there completely frozen, afraid for who knows how long. We woke up around 11 a.m. the next day because we had such a late night. That was the last night we stayed outside for at least a year. During college that was located away from major cities, the woods were all around us. That being said, there was a highly rated trail, the Loyal Sock Trail, which was about an hour drive from the university. I invited a friend to come with me as he had never been on an extended backpacking trip, a 50-plus mile trail that we intended to backpack over the 4-day weekend. I am an Eagle Scout who has spent countless hours in the woods and went on backpacking trips consistently throughout my college experience. As many have said before me, you get used to the minor spooky things happening. Coyote howls, raccoons in the middle of the night, even the occasional unknown noise. The scariest thing to find in the woods, however, are people. We were about 20 miles into the trail, and being Pennsylvania, where the underbrush and trees line the trails pretty densely, I always walk about 100 meters off of the trail to reduce the chances of me disturbing people or people disturbing me, especially in the early morning when I choose to sleep in. Following that same strategy, my friend and I go out of our way to be in this amazing spot a good ways off of the trail, where it would even be difficult to see our flashlights from the trail. This spot was on a peninsula where a creek met a river, meaning there was only one way into our camp, and only one way out. We start a fire, cook our food, and drink some, but not enough to get either of us drunk. We put the fire out about midnight and head into our individual tents. All is quiet. It is the fall semester, so leaves are on the ground, the moon is brightly shining through the bare trees, and the air is cool. The only noise is the occasional time when I would hear my friend turn over in his sleep. Then I hear the voices. The voices sounded very close for being on the trail 100 meters away. I check my watch. 3 a.m. Who hikes at 3 a.m.? We are 20 miles in. I slowly get out of my sleeping bag, slowly unzip my tent, only to see my friend peeking out of his tent in the exact same fashion. He quickly moves his finger over his mouth in an exaggerated hush signal, then used the same hand to frantically motion towards the way of the trail. Then we see them. 4 adults, 3 men and 1 woman, walking directly towards our camp. No lights illuminating their path. They are walking silently at this point. Only one of them has a backpack. An impossibility for the long hike, they were 1 per 3 of the way through. Being a long trip, you bring wood cutting supplies to chop branches into smaller branches to burn. For me, this was a survival knife. Grabbing the knife, believing it is my only way of defending myself, I am more disheveled than I ever have been, especially knowing that a knife is barely defense at all. These people walk into our site, sit down by our extinguished fire pit, and just sit there for what felt like an eternity. My friend speaks up and asks what they're doing in our campsite. Without answering the question, they ask if we have any food, having packed as lightly as possible for the long trip. We had only a few extra Mountain House, MRE-style meals. I grab one out of my bag and toss it to one of the men. In rapid succession, I ask why they aren't using a light, if they need help finding the trail, and why they are hiking so late. They respond with the following. We don't use lights. We know where the trail is. It is better to hike late at night. Unnerved at this point, my friend asks them to leave. They respond by asking if we want to light the fire and hang out for a bit. No, we do not. They grab their bag, get up and leave without speaking another word. We watch them leave and take shifts, making sure that they didn't come back. Needless to say, we both got very little sleep that night. When the sun rose the next morning, we finally got real sleep. By the afternoon, when we woke up, it all felt like a weird dream of sorts. The only evidence was a fuzzy cap that they must have dropped that I have to this day. I've never had something as weird and spooky as that happen in the woods, and hope to never have it happen again. In the 8 years since that trip, I haven't been back to the Loyal Sock Trail. I used to work at a Boy Scout summer camp. Every week I had to take a big group of campers to a secluded spot for their wilderness survival badge, where they had to build a shelter out of sticks, leaves, etc., and sleep in it overnight. The spot was only about 1 per 2 mile from the main camp, but we took them a circuitous route that made it seem really secluded. Anyways, on this one night, all the campers had made their shelters. We had cooked dinner, and we're all just sitting around the campfire. It was getting late, maybe 11 p.m., so I sent all the campers to their shelters for the night and started cleaning up the fire. That's when we heard in the distance what sounded like church bells. They were pretty faint, but myself and my fellow staffers could definitely hear them. They went on for about 30 minutes, ringing every 30 seconds or so. We were all a little creeped out, as there were no churches or towns within 20 miles of us. After the bells stopped, though, the singing started. It was too faint to hear the words, but it sounded like church choir music, but a lot of people, and a lot more enthusiastic. Also, it was almost midnight at this point. The singing went on for well over an hour, sometimes quieting down until we almost couldn't hear it, sometimes getting so loud we thought it was getting closer. All of the campers were super creeped out, but I lied to them, telling them there was a church service going on in camp, and that there was nothing to be scared of. Eventually, at almost 1 a.m., the singing stopped. I found out a few days later that there had been a large Klan rally only a few miles away that night, and that's what we had heard. Somehow people are scarier than ghosts. I went camping in Big Sur with one of my best friends. It was off-season and a Sunday night, so the place was practically empty. We picked a campsite about a half-mile walk to the ocean. It was in a huge open field surrounded by a lush forest. In the background were limestone mountains, and you could hear the crashing of the ocean's waves. We spent the night around a campfire telling stories and eating. We're both pretty experienced backpackers too. We are very diligent in ensuring we do not leave any trace of food by our site, and almost everything other than our essentials goes in the bear bag or box. I have my dog with me too. It's a full moon out, and it was pouring beautiful blue light across the field. Around 1 a.m., something spooks my dog. She is used to the woods and has an incredibly calm demeanor, but she is flipping out, tugging hard on the leash like she is desperate to escape. And she does. She pulls so hard that her harness snaps and she goes bolting across the field into the wilderness. I lose my cool. I drop everything and bolt after her. I'm not thinking straight running into the woods at night. My only concern was getting her even if it meant risking my own safety. I rescue her. I find her curled up in a random clearing in the woods, looking ashamed and terrified. Thank God she ran in a straight line, otherwise I would have been totally lost. I walk back carrying her, and my heart is pounding furiously at the horror of the idea of her being lost in the wilderness forever. The thought now is still unbearable. I can feel her heart pounding too in my arms. She's still terrified. I'm no longer in a great mood. We all head to bed in my tent, but my dog won't lay down. She refuses. Her ears are up and she's staring intensely at the tent wall, as if she could see through it and she's tracking something. It takes a while for my nerves to calm down from my chase earlier. I'm working hard at taking deep breaths and reminding myself that I'm prepared for anything that I could encounter, that my dog is simply spooked from maybe a raccoon. Maybe she's just exhausted and acting up, and then I hear it, cackling, like a high-pitched laughter that is full of a disgusting type of joy, and it's coming from outside my tent. My senses go on high alert. My body tenses up so tightly it's like I'm about to break in half. And then I hear even more cackling, like a group of witches were doing something evil just yards away. It fills my hearing, laughing and laughing and more laughing. It's loud and it just sounds so wrong. I can't even bring myself to move to look at my friend. It's like my entire body has given up. The laughs are then followed up with blood-curdling screams. It honestly sounded like somebody was being murdered. It was full of panic and horror and sadness. It could have been wolves or coyotes killing their prey. But it sounded so distinctly human. The laughter, the sobbing, the screams. I even begin to laugh a little because the situation was so intense and wild, I had no idea how else to react. I can't handle this, I say, and suggest that we bolt for the car. But it's a mile away, so we decide to stay out. We just listen to the laughter and screaming until it fades away. Even when it was over, I didn't bother going to bed. It's definitely just wildlife doing its thing, though.